Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Saturday Sampler. Beautiful day today, or more or less. It's going to be a little bit sunny. We're supposed to have a little bit more rain. And so, hi, Arda and Kyla, Mary, Alice. Welcome. Good morning, good morning. All right. Give a few minutes for others to come on board. If you want to grab your Kona card, if you are working with us through that. Otherwise, maybe just, if you take notes, pencil and pen, that type of thing. So, we are going to be finishing off today our Kona block of the month. We really went through it pretty fast, and there's a lot of sewing in between. I still have a couple blocks to finish up that I didn't get completely finished while we were on camera, so I've still got a little bit of work to do, but most of it's done. So get through today with putting the top together and talk a little bit about that, and then next week, as if you recall, I won't be here. I'm going to my niece's wedding, and then after, when we come back, we're going to have a week where I will talk about what we can do with the leftover charm squares, some possibilities and how we can go about that with all of that. So welcome, everyone. I also want to share with you a finish from a friend in Northern California in the Bay Area. Her name is Laverne, and let me get to her quilt. And there is her finished quilt, and it looks absolutely lovely. And she did a great job on it. She quilted herself, I believe. And so she wanted to send that in. She was very pleased with that. But I also, what I really appreciated about her and this quilt was the fact that she completely finished up all of her fabric, and she used all of the leftovers and her scraps in the back, which I'm going to show you now. And so anything that she had left over, she created the back side of her quilt, and I think it's just absolutely a wonderful way to take up that extra, that extra fabric, and so that she doesn't have, all of this unused stash laying around waiting for something. I know that I find when I have just little pieces of things, they don't always find their way into another quilt. So I think she did a great job on that. So thank you, Laverne, for sharing your finished quilt. That was it was just beautiful. And mine is, the top is here, so I need to get mine quilted and finished because it truly was and is a beautiful quilt. So anyway, all right, let's take a look at the quilt finishing for today, and putting on borders, etc. So I'm going to drop you down to the table, and that looks a little blurry. Let me see if I can clean that up just a tad. Nope, that made it worse. I think that's what we're going to get today. There we go. Got a little bit better. All right. This is the quilt top put together, and the instructions are here of how to go about that. But I want to give a few tips and talk a little bit about that putting it together so that the quilt is not out, that it's squared up. I guess that's the best way to say that, because the words aren't coming to me, in terms of that we can put these rows together, and sometimes when we are quilting or whatever, we may or may not have the same size all the way down. So I want to talk a little bit about how we put these squares and sashings together and put our borders on, so that in the end we have a quilt that hangs straight and is squared up. So the first thing that it tells us to do, and let me get my little stiletto here, is to sew our 18.5" by 2.5" strips together with cornerstone blocks, and you make 3 of those. All right, and I've got those going, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that. Let me see. I've got all this stuff here. So I took, my 18.5, put the, the one block in between, and the cornerstone block, and now I have this one to sew on. And as I am sewing this on, I really want to make sure, and again, here's where pins, glue, whatever, however you can best, keep these even, because if one of these corners starts to move on us or changes, what happens then is if it moves a little bit to the top, then you get that bow in there, and that begins to shift the quilt, and it does make a somewhat of a difference in the outcome of the final quilt. So want to keep that very straight and even as we sew it together. And also, just working to keep, that 1/4 inch all the way to the end of our sewing, and not remove our, our hands and things from that, so that we get a fatter, edge on one end, because we really want it to be 1/4 inch all the way across. And that is just as important, because if not, that is one of those things that can, move it. And so I'm going to press them towards the outside, and I'm just going to press over. So I want to set my seam and then press towards the white sashing, so that my seams are opposite of each other. All right, then I'll take my last, so I need 3 of the 18.5 inch and I didn't move my camera, and I apologize. And so now I'm working to get so that I can't see the pink on the inside, and I want to keep those straight, and on this side, and making sure that everything lines up again, because I want to keep that as straight as possible. Sometimes when we sew squares together and it's easy, quick things, we go fast and mind wanders, and we get to doing, we may or may not be as careful as sometimes we should be. And I'm rambling. All right, so this time I'll move the camera. And the last thing that we want to do again is we want to set our seam, and I'm pressing towards the white sashing part. So that my goal is to have my seams coming straight across, so that there is no curve or anything in that. So that I find is very helpful for me to remember and to remind myself of each time that I get ready to sew. Then the next thing that I want to talk about is I have put together, as best as I can let you see, my sashing pieces between my blocks. And you can arrange these blocks really any way that you want to on your quilt, or you can follow what they did on the pattern. The other thing that I want to mention is that you may want to take a sampling or measure all of them and see if your blocks are coming out to that 18.5 inches. And if you know, there are those that always want to trim, and you know, that's up to you, and if you feel that you need to. But the one thing that I do want to say to you is, as you're trimming and putting, you know, your ruler up against it, don't cut off your 1/4 inch when it comes to a seam line. So I will line up my ruler right there where my 1/4 inch is to where my 1/4 inch seam allowance is with my block. Because if I cut off too much of this, then my seam is going to have to move in here, and I'm going to have a blunt edge to that instead of a point. And what I found, that as I was measuring all of these, they pretty much came out to 8.5. So I'm not going to do anything with them, but I am going to pin and line up these points together so that I keep that 1/4 inch. So when I look to square off or line up a block, I always make sure that I line up, you know, from the edge, so that I get my 1/4 inch point, if that makes sense. And let me see if anybody has a comment to that, please. Let me, you know, add whatever, you know, your thoughts and comments are to that along the way. That would be helpful, I think, for everyone. All right, so I'm going to put my 3rd block on the end of this. And I took the center of my 18.5, which would be 9 1/4, and you know, put a seam line in there because I want to line up my block, the center of my quilt block, with that that line. So I know that I have my center in place. All right. And I am going to pin that, and again I go straight down and then over so that I'm not pushing fabric anywhere. Then I would like you to get in the habit, if you aren't already, of going to your corners next and getting the corner of your blocks and your sashing aligned on both ends. And I know it's a little bit hard to see all of this in this camera space that I have. All right, then if you feel like you need to add a pin in the center of, this is a long, section, and you can either adjust as you go. I'm looking at it here, and I don't really need to ease anything. If I was easing, I would find this, the center, and put a pin there so that I don't ease all in one place at the very end or whatever. But I'm not seeing, because I checked before doing this, I don't really have to do any easing, so I can go straight along with no easing possibilities in that. So let's pop over and get this sewn on. And again, if you have any thoughts on putting all this together, and tricks that you have learned that has made it helpful for you, please feel free to add it to the chat box, because that's always helpful to all of us. And I know that I learn quite a bit from each of you as you send notes, put things up on the forum, on YouTube, your questions, all of that. So please feel free to do that, and we welcome it. So basically, I didn't pin that center part, but I am, adjusting it as I go. And keeping this top block. And it keeps wanting to pull on me. I'm not sure what's going on with that. I think it's the way I pulled my underneath fabric. Yeah, there we go. Normally when I sew, I have my iron not right in front of me. It's off to the side. And I have this space to my left over here completely empty. But when right now I have my computer, my iron, my stuff that I'll need. So it makes it a little bit bulkier to my left here, off camera. And this is where I keep my fingers to the side, so that end doesn't, go anywhere. It doesn't veer off to the left or right. It stays put where I want it to stay put. All right. Now, again, I want to set my seam. And I will be pressing this seam to the center so that my seams are opposite of one another, and they will butt up against when I'm ready to sew my sashing through the middle. And again, I am, pressing up against that seam and then simply letting my iron sit without pushing it, and, making my fabric, stretch or move with that. All right. So now I have, my 3 blocks here. And then I need to grab my, sashing pieces. And now what I need to accomplish is that I want to line up the first place I'm going to line up my pinning is here and here, so that these match up to one another, and those seams are butted up and feel flat in my fingers, and they're even with one another. And I know you've heard me say this a million times. I pin from the top right to the bottom left so that I can sew in that stitch into my seam line, and before I have to pull my pin. Then I'm going to this side, doing the same, making sure those are even at the top and they feel flat in my fingers. going straight down, going from top left, and then as I sew, it's going to meet. So once I get those done, I still have the crease, and I'm going to find the center of my, block, which is right here. I can tell that by these seam lines in my pattern. So I'm going to align those together, pin here, and then, see if there is anything. And again, thankfully, there is no easing necessary because it's laying flat across. So pinning, start with your sashing blocks, go to the center of each of your quilts, come to your next sashing block, put that on, etc. I'm not necessarily going to sew that long seam at this point, but I want to go to the outside border. The sashing, you've got these two sashings between the blocks. We just talked about this sashing, putting that on. You've got 3 of those. So the center of your quilt then would be done. And again, you can arrange your blocks however you want to. I keep in mind color, what I would call texture maybe, or heaviness. With that, I wouldn't put all the heavy blocks in one area, and the lighter, what I would say lighter, simply meaning that they look like they weigh less because they have more background to them. I wouldn't put all those together in one place because then I would feel my eye would go to the heavy part first, and I want to see, when I look at my quilt, I want to be able, my eye travel the quilt and see all of it and have it, pretty much weighted all the way around. So let me go to the questions and see if anyone has, when putting sashing on, it is easier to frame your block on the sides vertically and horizontally, or horizontally and long strips vertically. I think that's a choice, and so absolutely, if it's easier to go, vertically as opposed to horizontally, whichever way that you want to do that. People work in rows. Joining rows together is a shorter seam than join columns. The chance of getting a pucker, and that's pretty much why I do it too. Thank you, Kyla. It's done both ways, and I think whatever is comfortable for you is what you should do. What works for you. Yeah, and Lynn, that's another way to do it. And everybody kind of has their thing of how they go about tackling. I want to talk about these 5-inch squares for just a minute. They are cut so they don't fray so much with this sawtoothed edge. And what I have noticed with charm squares is you certainly can sew them just as they are and come out okay. But when I put my ruler at the end of the teeth, or even inside the teeth, I have more than 5 inches. And you can, hopefully on the camera, I have my 5-inch at the end of the teeth on this side, and this is what I have left over on this side and at the top, and you can see that. So I find that I personally get a better result in the end, and I don't have to do much trimming that way if I go in and align my ruler just inside those teeth where the teeth start moving in. And so basically I'm cutting off the teeth all the way around. And so you can see, you know, what's being cut off there. Then I'll turn it, and now I take extra care to make sure that I have my ruler aligned at that 5-inch. And sitting down and cutting is very difficult, in my opinion. Alright, so again, you can see what is left on that, and you know, I would say from the edge to that is close to an 1/8 of an inch, somewhere between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch. Now, when I cut my strips for the border here, I know that I will have 2.5 by 5 inch strips, and it's going to match the length and width of my quilt. So and I know that's time consuming, but for my end result, I find it to just be helpful for me. So I wanted to pass that on to you also, because when we sew all of these blocks together, we want them to be even, and sew well so that, they meet at the top, they meet at the bottom, and we don't have to worry about, any easing, all of that kind of stuff in our borders, because our borders are where we can really, get off the mark on that. Kyla, pre-cuts, I tend not to buy them either, but the teeth of them I do cut off, because I do know that they're not the same. They're not the same size that they say on the packaging necessarily. So on part number 6, they're saying sew 41 2.5 by 5 inch rectangles, and make a second side border. So you're going to make 2 strips that have 41 2.5 by 5 inch of these, and just choose from your the charm packs that you have left over, and you will still have charm packs left over even after you pull out your 82 here and your 31, your 62 for the top and bottom. You're still going to have charm packs left over. And just to remind you, they have a full square in the 4 corners. So just, make note of that as you're putting this together. So we put the side seams on this border here, which I believe is 78 and a half. Yes, that's what they're saying up here. Again, when I'm putting these long sashing or border strips on, I mark my middle on both my sashing and my quilt. All right. Then I will pin the middle first. Then I pin the edges, and then I will go back and pin, because this is quite a long strip, and I will put several pins along there just to hold as placeholders in that. So I put the sides on first, because when I'm cutting, it usually takes less fabric putting the borders on if I do the longest one first, and then I would do the same with the top. I would find my center, pin that, and then pin each side on that, and then do the same thing with these borders, the side would go on first, and then the top and bottom. And then your quilt is completed. At least the top is before you quilt it. You have quite a bit of fabric left with the remainder of the charm packs. Let me grab my stack. So I have all this left, from, what I needed in the quilt. There's another quilt here. And that, and so yes, I could put these in my scrap box and have all of that, around. But what I would rather do is make another quilt, because I do have this leftover fabric. Now, not next week because I'll be gone, but the week after, when we come back, I will have a series of possible blocks that you could make into another quilt, some other possibilities, and even, like Laverne did on the quilt that I showed you at the beginning, what she did on the back, recreate a second quilt, put it on the back of maybe even this quilt right here. So that's kind of what's coming up, and then we'll move into other projects and ideas and things. I do want to check the chat box and make sure. All right, I think I answered the questions that I saw. Okay. All right. So enjoy finishing up the top of your quilt. Sewing, it takes a while to sew all those strips together, and I got started. But chaining them certainly makes life go a lot easier. So I put my piles of 30, 31, and I think whatever the other one was, 41. So I had 2 piles of 41s and 2 piles of 31s. And chain sewed those together. It made it go a whole lot faster with that. I usually cut square. Okay, Kyla says, for my extra fabric, I usually cut squares and sew 2 squares together as my leaders and enders. I make a bonus quilt doing this. Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful way to save time as well as your fabric. And Kathy, thank you. I will have a wonderful time at the wedding. Since I'm doing the flowers, I'll be a little stressed before then. But so I will see you in 2 weeks. Have a wonderful time. Enjoy wherever you live. Hopefully, those of you in the East Coast, these storms will stop. The rain will stop. Here off and on, we do need the rain, just not all at once. And so enjoy your 2 weeks, and I'll